Hi guys, I am out of the Airbnb and enjoying a beautiful day at the Seine River in France. Didn't quite get the dress code, unfortunately, but we're just going to make do with what we have. So today we are going to be going over our next module and enjoying this beautiful day. We are learning about the elements of art this week, and so this will be divided into a few parts, and hopefully I can enjoy telling you about them the whole time in this beautiful park on this beautiful day. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we'll get started. All right, there we go. Okay, so the elements of art are really the key foundation to what art is, and specifically how we talk about form. If you remember from last week, when we talked about the form, subject matter, and content. And so this is really where most artwork, if not all artwork, sort of begins, is with the elements of art. Now, I'm going to refer as a metaphor to the elements of art as being the ingredients to art making. Now, this doesn't mean the comparison it works because not all ingredient combinations are going to result in successful recipes, right? Same thing with the elements of art. Not every combination of color and light and shape and space are going to create beautiful artworks. You have to know how to organize those in order to make your recipes or your art organization. And so in our next module, we will learn about the principles, which will be the recipes equivalent to the art words. So let's go ahead and begin with a few of them. Lesson 3 is going to cover line, shape, and form. And so that's where we're going to begin at today. So the definition, the ingredients artists use to create their work from. And the list is line, shape, form, space, texture, value, and color. And then I have a little diagram over here that gives you a picture of each of those and kind of what they represent. You probably already know this. This might be sort of, repetitive stuff that you're learning, or you're maybe learning a little bit more about it that you didn't know. But this is what this set of lessons is going to cover. So beginning with line, this is sort of our gateway into the elements. It's sort of where most things start at. And the definition is a line is a path created by a moving point or a dot. Some people consider dot to be an element of art, and I don't really think so much. But this is essentially where a point in space, point A, creates a point A to a point B. Different types include horizontal, vertical, diagonal, curved, zigzag. And just a fun fact, did you know that the type of line can influence the mood? And our next slide is going to kind of talk about that a little bit and have some questions to follow it up with. For example, though, curves can indicate a calm feeling, and zigzags can create a sort of chaotic or uneasy feeling. And then I have this diagram over here that I think is really helpful for understanding how the form of line can create content as well and how those two become connected. So, for example, we kind of know what these are, this actual line, this implied line where you have a row of dots kind of in a sequence. Think about row of birds flying in the sky, a row of caution cones on the road. This creates the implication of a line that cannot be crossed. You have actual straight lines and implied curved lines in this example, line created by an edge, like we see here. And as far as the vertical, horizontal, and diagonal lines go, they can create a lot of emotion or mood as well. For example, vertical lines, they sort of have this sense of like alert attention. Think about like trees standing tall and buildings. Those things are very active, right? They're actively alive and existing. Whereas like a horizontal line, this usually indicates like attitude of rest or being unawake, essentially. Think about like when you're sleeping or when anything is sleeping. It's horizontal. And so when we see a lot of vertical lines in an artwork or a lot of horizontal lines, it sort of helps to create that mood. Think about like a landscape, for example. You see a lot of horizontal lines in landscapes, and that gives a feeling of sort of rest and relaxation and put you at ease. Whereas a lot of vertical lines, those can indicate more of a feeling of alertness and readiness. And then lastly, zigzag lines or diagonal lines. These create sort of like the zigzag lines, a feeling of chaos, but more specifically, like an action happening. Think about like when you're falling, or if anything's falling, if a tree is falling, and before it's at rest, horizontal, and after it is vertical and standing upright, it's in this limbo of being diagonal. And so when you see that in artwork, that can give a feeling of transition or action, essentially. Something is, happening in between the horizontal and the vertical. We also see these sharp, jagged lines, dancing, curving lines, hard line and soft line, and ragged, irregular lines as well that can be created from like splatters of paint and things like that. There's lots of definitions for what line is. Okay, so I have an example here for you that is showing two different drawings done by the same artist. They're very similar, but they have one thing that sort of changes between the two. So I'm going to ask you in the questions, what words would you use to describe the images or the lines in the left image? So go ahead and answer that one. And then what about the right? What would you say for that one? And then lastly, what type of mood or energy do they each produce? And this will just be one question, so you can answer that both in the one question. Okay, so hopefully you said something like the image on the left, the woman here, she is creating the lines that we see being used here are all curving, all very smooth. There's no harsh zigzags or anything. Everything kind of transitions smoothly into one another. There's a softness and a gentleness about it. And then on the right, the warrior guy over here, there's a lot of sharp zigzag lines that sort of create a feeling of aggression or action, not nearly as like gentle and relaxing and calming as the one on the left. So the main difference here is the type of line that is being used between the two pieces. And this also helps us to connect to the content as well. So remember, this is going to come up a lot, and I'm going to make lots of comparisons to this. So form, like our line, our use of line here, is helping to give us the content, which is the meaning of the work. So without even doing any research or anything, I can assume that this one on the right here, the warrior guy that's in action, this is depicting a warrior, someone who is, aggressive, is, moving quickly, is, in battle maybe. And so there's a lot of sort of sharp, jagged edges here to help represent that, to help the form connect to the content. And then on the left, this is depicting a theater actor. And so, the mood here that the artist is trying to create is more serene, more calming, more flowing, like a theater actor. And so she's using lines that have that quality to them, unlike the jagged, zigzaggy lines on the other one. So this use of line and shape also differing between the two helps the artist to tell us what the content is about. And so that's just a really kind of straightforward example of that. It usually won't be that, easy to identify, but this is a really good example of how just one element can change the whole feeling of an artwork. Now, shape is our next element. And the definition of a shape is a flat enclosed area that is also two-dimensional. That's an important thing to note, is that shape is always going to be two-dimensional. Now, the types, you've got geometric, which are square, triangle, circle, and it can provide a sense of stability in an artwork. And the organic, like clouds and puddles, can seem chaotic and ungrounded. And so this isn't, I know, like, in the actual Last Supper artwork, but I want to kind of draw a little like comparison here on some shapes that are being implied and created. So we have here this organic shape that is created through the figures on the left and the figures on the right. There's no real sense of groundedness there. But then in the center here, right directly in the middle, is this triangle that Jesus creates. And you kind of have to look past what is just right in front of you, use your active seeing to find these shapes, but you can tell the 3 points, the head, the hand, and the hand all create this very stable triangle figure that's unlike the two shapes on the left and the right that those figures create. Now, when it comes to form and content, this is a great example of how we can use shape, this geometric, stable shape, to create a sense of like meaning in the work. In this story, if we look into it, all of the disciples are very alarmed, they're very confused, chaotic, they're arguing. And so it makes sense why the artist would use these, really organic, crazy shapes for them. And then Jesus knows what's going to happen. He's already aware in this story of like how this is going to go, and he is this symbol of calm and peace and ease. And so it makes sense to use a triangle to create this shape for him, of him, and that adds to the meaning of the story without us having to write that out directly. Really, really masterful use of this. There's a reason that Da Vinci is, as famous as he is. But yeah, so this is how you can see shape being applied in an artwork. And then our last element for this video is going to be form. And form is 3D shapes that have depth to them. So they have height, width, and depth, three components to them, whereas shape just has height and width. And some examples, real form is found in sculptures and architecture, but we also have implied form as well. So actual form is a 3D sculpture or an architectural piece, but implied form is the appearance of a drawing or painting having depth. And you can see this in this example here. So by using shading and value, another one of our elements that we're going to talk about in a further, one of our next lessons that we're going to do, by using that value, a sense of form is created. There's a sense of what's closest to us, what's farthest away from us, without it actually having to be in the three-dimensional space. So there's a lot of ways that you can imply form, and that's what kind of takes our drawings and our paintings from being very flat and very dimensionless, to being having more depth to them, having more interest to them. But yeah, actual form is really easy to understand. Implied form, you kind of have to use other elements in order to create it. And that is the end of lesson 3. We're going to do a lesson 4 video that deals with space and value. Two great ways to create form are by using space and value. So hopefully you'll come back pretty soon for that, and I will see you in the next video.